Okay, lesson 4.3 is about triangle congruence using ASA and AAS. So our objectives are to prove two triangles are congruent using the ASA postulate and the AAS theorem. So the angle side angle or ASA postulate says if two angles in the included side of one triangle are congruent to two angles in the included side of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. So if we look at our example here, angle G is congruent to angle K, angle H is congruent to angle N, and the side between the angles GH and KN are congruent. So triangle GBH is congruent to triangle KPN by the angle side angle postulate. Okay, then if we look at theorem 4.2, angle side theorem, if two angles in the non-included side of one triangle are congruent, and the two angles and the corresponding non-included side of the other triangle are congruent, the two triangles are congruent. So we have angle C congruent to angle X, angle D congruent to angle G, and then the side after those two angles, side DM and side GT, are congruent. So that would be the angle side theorem. So we've got triangle DCM congruent to triangle GXT. Okay, let's look at an example using these. Suppose that angle F is congruent to angle C. So angle F is congruent to angle C. And I is not congruent to C. Name the triangles that are congruent by the angle side angle postulate. So the diagram shows that angle N is congruent to A is congruent to D. So N, A, and D are all congruent. It also shows that FN is congruent to CA, and that's also congruent to GD. So if F is congruent to C, then F is congruent to C, and C is congruent to G, because it's also marked. Therefore, triangle FNI is congruent to triangle CAT is congruent to triangle GDO by the angle side angle postulate. Okay, then we've got a check for understanding question here for you. Can you conclude that triangle INF is congruent to either of the two triangles? And explain. Okay. So let's look at a couple more examples together. Writing a proof using angle side angle. So they tell you angle A is congruent to B, and they mark it for you. They tell you that side AP is congruent to side AB, or PB, sorry. And we're trying to prove that the two triangles are congruent. So, given that angle A is congruent to angle B and side AP is congruent to side BP, we also know that angle APX, so this angle right here, is congruent to angle BPY on the other side by the vertical angles theorem, because they're across from each other on that X. That is from chapter 2. Okay, so then we've got an angle, a side, and an angle. So these two triangles are congruent by the ASA postulate. Let's look at the angle side postulate. So they tell you angle D is congruent to angle B. Side AB and CD are parallel. So these two sides here are parallel. That's what those little arrows mean. And we want to prove the triangles are congruent. So, since those two sides are parallel, we can extend the lines, and then we have parallel lines that are cut by a transversal which we learned about. Triangle BAC up here is congruent to angle DCA on the other side because the alternate interior angles theorem. They're on opposite sides of the transversal, they're inside the parallel lines. So then triangle ABC is congruent to triangle CDA. If a pair of corresponding sides are congruent by the reflexive property, they both share this side. So AC is congruent to AC, and the triangles are congruent by the angle side postulate. Okay, writing a proof for that. This is the information they gave to us, so that's given. Then we proved angle BAC congruent to angle DCA, and we used the alternate interior angles for that. We knew AC was congruent to AC by the reflexive property of congruence. And then finally we proved the triangles were congruent by the angle side theorem. Okay, so all we did here is take the information we had from the paragraph and we put it into 2 columns. All right, you've got a couple of text understanding problems to try. The first one, you're gonna read through the given information and try to find a way to prove that these 2 triangles are congruent. So I would start by writing my given information here, and then this box would be given. And you go from there to figure out how you're gonna prove those triangles are congruent. In this one, you're gonna write a flow proof, so it gives you information. You've got to write how you know it. So like here, this box is given. Usually the first one is the given information, and you just sort through until you prove that the 2 triangles are congruent. So in the end, your goal is to prove that triangle SRP is congruent to triangle QRP. And you got to figure out what theorem you're going to use to prove that. And then number 4, recall example 4. Explain how you could prove triangle ABC congruent to triangle CDA using angle side angle. So go ahead and get started on that. If you have any questions, make sure you're asking, and good luck.